The billionaire thought he knew the truth. Until he opened that door. He thought his fiancée was the perfect woman. Elegant, loving, ready to become his wife. He thought the maid was just staff, someone easy to ignore. But on the night of his engagement party, standing behind a stone bridge with water rushing below, he watched the woman he was about to marry grab another human being by the hair and throw her into water that was not empty. It was full of fins, full of teeth, full of death. And in that 1 second, everything he believed about love, loyalty, and the woman standing next to him shattered forever. Hey, welcome back. If you're new here, I'm so glad you found us. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from tonight and which country do you call home? Drop it in the comments. I love seeing where this community comes from. Tonight's story is one of the most emotional, most shocking stories I've ever told on this channel. A story about power, betrayal, and one woman who was underestimated by everyone. Until the truth came out. Stay with me till the end because what happens in this story will stay with you long after the video ends. Nobody at that party knew what was about to happen. Daniel Cross was 34 years old, and by every outward measure, he had won at life. He owned half a city skyline in glass and steel. His name appeared in business magazines next to words like visionary and self-made. And tonight, under the string lights of his Tuscan-style estate, he was about to announce his engagement to Sofia Marchetti, 30 years old, radiant in a purple gown that caught the candlelight like it was made for her. Everyone said they were a perfect match. Sofia had grown up in old money, the kind of family that didn't need to work but worked anyway to stay relevant. She was sharp, beautiful, and knew exactly which fork to use at a 7-course dinner. When she smiled at photographers, the smile reached her eyes. Daniel had fallen for that smile 2 years ago, at a charity gala where she'd laughed at his terrible joke about hedge funds and made him feel, for the first time in years, like a person instead of a bank account. But there was one thing about Sofia that Daniel had never quite understood. The way she treated the staff. It wasn't loud. It wasn't the kind of cruelty that made headlines. It was small. A clipped tone here, a dismissive wave there, an order given without ever making eye contact. Daniel told himself it was just how she was raised. Old money families were like that sometimes. Distant, formal. He never thought it meant anything deeper. Especially not when it came to Maria. Maria Alvarez was 34 years old, the same age as Daniel, though nobody at the party would have guessed it. Years of hard work had aged her hands more than her face. Hands that had, for the last 8 years, kept this entire estate running. She had started as a housekeeper when Daniel's mother, Eleanor, was still alive. After Eleanor passed, Maria stayed. She was the one who remembered which mug Daniel liked his coffee in. She was the one who noticed when he hadn't slept in 3 days after a bad quarter. She was, in every way that mattered, more of a constant in his life than almost anyone else. And yet, to most of the guests at this party, she was invisible. To staff. Just the woman in the brown uniform refilling champagne glasses. Daniel had never noticed how Sofia looked at Maria. A flicker of something cold, gone as fast as it appeared. If he had noticed, he might have asked questions sooner. He might have paid attention to the way Sofia's jaw tightened whenever Maria entered a room they were both in. He might have wondered why, out of an entire household staff, Sofia seemed to have a special kind of contempt reserved only for her. But Daniel wasn't paying attention to any of that tonight. Tonight, he was thinking about the small velvet box in his jacket pocket, and the words he'd practiced in the mirror that morning. Tonight was supposed to be the beginning of the rest of his life. He had no idea it would also be the night that pulled the mask off the woman he loved. The party had moved out toward the back gardens, where a narrow stone bridge crossed over the estate's private lagoon, a feature Daniel's father had built decades ago, stocked originally with harmless koi, later upgraded, at great and controversial expense, into something more dramatic for the guests who liked to be impressed. Reef sharks. Small, mostly docile, kept for spectacle rather than danger under normal circumstances. Guests loved leaning over the railing with champagne in hand, watching the dark shapes glide beneath the surface like something out of a nature documentary. Daniel excused himself from a conversation with an old business partner, and went looking for a quiet corner to gather his nerves before the toast. That was when he heard raised voices near the bridge. He almost didn't investigate. It was probably nothing, catering staff arguing over timing maybe. But something in the tone made him pause. He recognized one of the voices immediately. It was Sophia's. He moved closer, staying in the shadow of the hedges, close enough to hear but not yet seen. And what he heard in the next 30 seconds would replay in his mind for the rest of his life. "You think I don't know what you've been doing?" Sophia's voice was low, venomous, nothing like the warm, polished tone she used in front of cameras. "You think I don't see you whispering to him? Trying to remind him of his precious dead mother every chance you get?" "I have no idea what you're talking about," Maria said, her voice steady but wary. "Don't play innocent with me," Sophia hissed. "I know exactly what you found. And if you think for 1 second I'm going to let some maid ruin everything I've worked for." Daniel's stomach dropped. He didn't understand what they were talking about, what Maria had found, but he understood with sudden and terrifying clarity that whatever it was, Sophia was afraid of it. Afraid enough that her voice was shaking with something close to panic. He should have stepped out right then. He should have said something. But some instinct, maybe the same instinct that had built his company from nothing, told him to wait. To watch. To understand the full shape of what he was seeing before he interrupted it. That decision would save Maria's life. But it also meant he had to witness, with his own eyes, exactly how far Sophia was willing to go. The seconds that followed felt like they stretched into minutes. Maria took a step back toward the bridge railing, putting distance between herself and Sophia. Her expression caught somewhere between fear and defiance. "I don't know what you think I found," she said again, quieter this time. "But whatever it is, Sophia, it's not my business. I've never said a word to Daniel about anything that isn't my place to discuss." "Not your place," Sophia repeated and laughed, a short, humorless sound. "You've been in this house for 8 years, playing the loyal little servant, acting like you're part of the family. You're not part of the family. You clean up after us. That's all you'll ever be." Daniel felt his jaw tighten. He'd never heard Sophia speak like this. Not to anyone. In 2 years together, he had seen her be cold, occasionally sharp with subordinates at her family's company, but never cruel. Never like this. "I raised no objection when Daniel kept you on after his mother died," Sophia continued, moving closer to Maria again, her purple gown dragging across the stone. "I told myself, fine, let the poor woman keep her job, sentimental attachment, whatever. But I am not going to let you destroy my future because you can't keep your mouth shut about ancient history." "I haven't said anything," Maria said, and now there was an edge of real fear in her voice. "Sophia, please. Whatever you're worried about, just talk to me. Let's talk about this like." "There's nothing to talk about." Sophia's voice had dropped to something almost calm, and that calm was somehow more frightening than her anger had been. "There's only one way this ends well for me." Daniel watched Sophia's hand shoot forward and grab a fistful of Maria's hair. Everything after that happened too fast for him to process in real time. His body understood before his mind caught up. He was already moving, already pushing through the hedge, already opening his mouth to shout Sophia's name, but he was still 15 feet away, and Sophia was faster, and stronger than her elegant frame suggested, fueled by something that looked less like anger now and more like desperation. She dragged Maria toward the edge of the bridge. "Sophia, stop." Daniel's voice finally broke free, but it was too late. He watched Sophia shove Maria over the low stone railing. Maria's scream was cut short by the splash. Daniel's mind went white with panic. Below, in the water that guests had spent all evening admiring for its dramatic effect, dark fins were already cutting toward the disturbance. Maria surfaced, thrashing, one arm reaching desperately for the ledge, water and terror in her voice as she screamed for help. "Don't let her out," Sophia shouted. And for one horrifying moment, Daniel didn't understand who she was even talking to. Then he realized. She wasn't calling for help. She was making sure no one else pulled Maria out in time. Daniel didn't remember deciding to move. He remembered his hands hitting the stone railing, remembered vaulting over it without a single thought for his own safety, remembered the shock of cold water closing over his head as he hit the lagoon. He remembered grabbing Maria's outstretched arm and pulling with every ounce of strength he had, screaming for the other guests, for security, for anyone. What he would never forget, what would replay behind his eyes for months afterward, was the look on Sophia's face as she stood at the railing above them. She wasn't screaming for help. She was watching, waiting. And for just a fraction of a second, before the mask slid back into place and she started performing panic for the gathering crowd, Daniel saw something in her expression that made his blood run cold. Relief. The next few minutes were chaos. Security guards pulled Daniel and Maria out of the water, both of them soaked, shaking, Maria's arm bleeding from a shallow gash where a fin or tooth had grazed her in the struggle. Not fatal, but enough blood in the water to turn Daniel's stomach when he thought about how much worse it could have been. Jess screamed. Someone called for a doctor. Sophia, to her credit as a performer, had already transformed her face into a mask of horror, clutching her chest, telling anyone who would listen that Maria must have slipped, that it was such a terrible accident, that thank God Daniel had reacted so fast. Daniel said nothing. He sat on the stone edge of the bridge, dripping, his tuxedo ruined, his hands still shaking, and he stared at Sophia across the small crowd of guests now fussing over her shock. She met his eyes for 1 second. And in that second, something passed between them, an understanding unspoken, that the performance she was giving everyone else was not going to work on him. He had seen her hand in Maria's hair. He had heard her say, "There was only one way this ends well for me." The paramedics arrived within 20 minutes. Maria's injury, thankfully, was not severe. A deep scratch, not a bite, the sharks having been startled more than aggressive, the whole horrifying encounter lasting less than 90 seconds. But 90 seconds is a very long time when you are in the water with something that has teeth. And Maria's hands would not stop trembling as the paramedic wrapped gauze around her forearm. Daniel knelt beside her. "Maria, I need you to tell me what that was about. What did she mean, what you found?" Maria's eyes flicked toward Sophia, still holding court with concerned guests 50 feet away, and then back to Daniel. "Not here," she whispered. "Please. Not tonight." "She tried to kill you," Daniel said, his voice low but shaking with barely controlled fury. "Tonight. In front of me. I need to understand why." Maria closed her eyes for a long moment. When she opened them, there were tears, not from the pain in her arm, but from something deeper, something that had clearly been sitting heavy in her chest for a very long time. 3 weeks ago," she said quietly, "I was cleaning out a storage closet in the East Wing, the one that used to belong to your mother. I found a box of old letters and financial documents your mother had kept, hidden behind a false panel. I wasn't looking for anything. I was just doing my job." "What was in them?" Maria hesitated, glancing again toward Sophia. "Records. Bank transfers. Correspondence between Sophia's father and your late business partner, Richard Voss, going back almost a decade. Records showing that Sophia's family fortune isn't what everyone believes it is. That most of it, the Marchetti name, the estates, the reputation, it's built on money that was quietly siphoned out of your mother's charitable foundation before she died. Money meant for children's hospitals. Redirected, laundered through shell companies, and used to prop up Sophia's family business after it nearly collapsed 12 years ago." Daniel felt the ground shift beneath him. "Your mother found out," Maria continued, her voice trembling now. Right before she got sick. I think that's part of why she got so quiet those last few months. I always wondered. She never told me directly, but she gave me that box one day and told me to keep it somewhere safe, somewhere no one would think to look. She said, "If anything ever happens to me, and if you ever see someone trying to hurt this family from the inside, you'll know what to do." I didn't understand what she meant. Not until 3 weeks ago, when I found the box again while cleaning and started reading. "And you told Sophia?" "No." Maria shook her head firmly. "I never said a word to Sophia. I didn't even tell you. I wasn't sure what to do. I was scared. I didn't want to blow up your engagement over documents that were 10 years old, maybe misunderstood. But somehow she found out I'd found them. I don't know how. Maybe she had someone watching the house. Maybe she searched my room. I don't know. But 3 days ago, she cornered me in the kitchen and told me that if I ever showed those documents to you, or to anyone, she would make sure I regretted it. Thought she meant firing me. I didn't think." Her voice broke. "I didn't think she meant this." Daniel looked back at Sophia, still smiling for the small crowd of guests, still playing the part of the shaken, loving fiancé. And for the first time in 2 years, he understood that he had never actually known this woman at all. The party ended early that night. Guests ushered out with hurried apologies about a small accident, nothing to worry about, the kind of damage control only money can buy in real time. By midnight, the estate was quiet except for the low hum of the pool filtration system and the distant sound of the lagoon's water settling back into stillness, as if nothing at all had happened in it a few hours earlier. Daniel found Sophia in the drawing room, still in her purple gown, a glass of wine in her hand, sitting by the fire like it was any other evening. "We need to talk," he said. "I know you're upset," Sophia said without turning around. "It was an accident, Daniel. She must have slipped on the wet stone. I tried to catch her, and I ended up making it worse. I panicked. Stop." The word came out flatter and harder than he intended, but it worked. Sophia turned to face him, and for a moment, Daniel almost let himself believe the fear in her eyes was real. "I saw you," he said. "I heard everything. Every word. You grabbed her by the hair. You threw her over that railing. And when I tried to pull her out, you told the guards not to let her out of the water." Sophia's expression cracked, just slightly, just enough. "Daniel, you don't understand what she's been doing. She's been planning to blackmail us. Manipulating your feelings about your mother to turn you against me. She told me about the foundation money," Daniel said quietly. The room went silent except for the crackling fire. Sophia's face changed, not into panic exactly, but into something colder, more calculating, the mask finally slipping away completely. When she spoke again, her voice had lost every trace of warmth. "So that's what this is about. My family used some of your mother's foundation money to stay afloat. Was a loan. It was going to be paid back. A loan nobody agreed to. Stolen from children's hospitals." "Don't be so dramatic," Sophia snapped. "It's business, Daniel. Money moves. Nobody got hurt. Someone almost died tonight because of it," Daniel said, his voice shaking now with a fury he had never felt in his life. "You threw a woman into a lagoon full of sharks because she found out the truth about the family you were about to marry into. I don't care about the money, Sophia. I care that you were willing to kill someone to protect a lie." Sophia's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, Daniel saw the calculation happening behind them. The recognition that the performance was over, that there was no version of tonight that ended with her walking away as the sympathetic fiancée. "You have no proof of anything," she said coldly. "It's my word against a maid's. Who do you think the police, the press, anyone is going to believe? Sophia Marchetti, or the help?" "I was standing right there," Daniel said. "I pulled her out of the water myself. I have witnesses among the security staff who saw exactly what happened before I got there. And now," He reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. "I also have your confession recorded from the last 2 minutes." Sophia's face went white. "The engagement is over," Daniel said, setting the small velvet box he'd carried all evening down on the table between them. The ring he'd planned to give her hours earlier, now nothing more than a symbol of how thoroughly he'd been fooled. "And tomorrow morning, my lawyers are going to be in contact with yours about the foundation funds your family owes back, with interest. As for tonight, I'll let the police decide what charges apply to attempted murder." "You wouldn't," Sophia said, but there was no confidence left in her voice. "Watch me." The story could have ended there. A wealthy man discovering his fiancée's true nature, calling off a wedding, seeking justice through lawyers and courts. And in many ways, that part of the story did unfold exactly like that over the following months. But the truth Daniel uncovered that night went deeper than even Maria knew, and it would take him somewhere he never expected. 2 days after the party, still shaken, Daniel asked Maria if he could see the documents she had found. She led him to a small storage room in the East Wing, one he hadn't set foot in since his mother's funeral 7 years earlier, and pulled out a weathered cardboard box from behind a loose wall panel. Inside were bank statements, letters, and, tucked at the very bottom, in a sealed envelope with Daniel's name written on it in his mother's unmistakable handwriting, something Maria hadn't opened because it wasn't addressed to her. Daniel sat on the dusty floor of that storage room and opened the letter with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. His mother had written it 8 years earlier, not long before her diagnosis. In it, she explained everything: the missing foundation funds, her suspicions about the Marchetti family, and her fear that she wouldn't live long enough to protect her son from people who valued his fortune more than they would ever value him. But there was something else in the letter, something Daniel hadn't expected at all. His mother wrote about Maria. "Maria has been with us for 3 years now," the letter read, "and I need you to know something I never had the courage to tell you directly, Daniel. When your father and I adopted you, we were told very little about your birth mother, only that she was young, and that she couldn't care for a child at the time. I always wondered what happened to her, whether she thought of you, whether she was even still alive. 3 years ago, when Maria came to work for us, I noticed something in her, a resemblance in your eyes, in the shape of your smile, that I couldn't shake. I did something I probably shouldn't have. I had a private investigator quietly confirm it. Maria is your birth mother, Daniel. She doesn't know that I know. She took this job not for the money. She could have found better paying work elsewhere, but because it was the only way she could be near you, to watch you grow into the man you've become, without ever disrupting the life you built with us. I never told either of you because I was afraid of what it might do to our family, to her position, to everything. That was selfish of me, and I regret it more than almost anything else in my life. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and it means it's time for the truth to come out. On your terms, whenever you're ready. Please be gentle with her. She has loved you from a distance for your entire life, asking for nothing in return." Daniel read the letter 3 times before he could bring himself to look up. Maria was standing in the doorway, watching him, and something in her face told him she had already guessed what the letter contained. "You knew," Daniel whispered. Tears were already streaming down Maria's face. "I've known since the day I was hired," she said, her voice breaking completely now. "I was 19 when I had you, Daniel. I was scared and alone, and I made a choice I have regretted and understood in equal measure every single day since. When I found out years later that the family who adopted you needed household staff, I applied under a different last name. I told myself I'd just look at you from a distance, just once, just to see that you were okay. And then I couldn't leave. I told myself I'd tell you the truth one day, when the moment was right. But there was never a right moment. And then your mother, your real mother in every way that mattered, got sick, and I thought, who am I to take anything else from this family? So I stayed quiet. I stayed the maid. It was enough for me just to be near you." Daniel crossed the small room and, for the first time in his adult life, embraced the woman who had given birth to him, the woman who had made his coffee every morning for 8 years, who had noticed every bad day and every triumph, who had loved him fiercely and silently from 3 feet away and never once asked for anything in return. "You're not the maid," he said, his voice thick with tears of his own. "You never were." "You're not the maid," he said, his voice thick with tears of his own. "You never were." Word of what happened that night spread quickly, despite Daniel's efforts to keep it contained. The society pages that had once fawned over Sophia Marchetti's engagement now buzzed with rumors of a scandal, an incident at a private estate, a broken engagement, whispers of foundation funds and missing money that Daniel's legal team was, very publicly and very deliberately, no longer keeping quiet about. Sophia's family tried, at first, to control the narrative. Statements were released calling the entire story a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. Her father made a brief, awkward television appearance defending his daughter's character. But the recording Daniel had captured that night, Sophia's own voice, cold and unmistakable, admitting to the stolen funds and threatening Maria, eventually made its way through legal channels into the hands of investigators. Once the financial audit began in earnest, it became clear the missing foundation money wasn't a one-time loan. It was a pattern going back nearly a decade. Hundreds of thousands of dollars meant for a children's hospital wing that had, as a result, been delayed for years. Sophia was charged with attempted assault stemming from the incident at the lagoon. Her father faced separate charges related to the diverted funds. The Marchetti name, once synonymous with old money elegance, became synonymous instead with scandal, the kind that doesn't fade quickly in a world where headlines never fully disappear. But Daniel found in the weeks that followed that he cared less and less about any of it. His focus had shifted entirely toward something he had never expected to have at 34 years old, the chance to actually know his mother. He moved Maria out of the small staff quarters at the back of the estate and into the main house, not as an employee anymore, but as family, though she resisted the change at first, insisting she didn't need anything grand, that she was happy simply being near him in whatever capacity made sense. "You don't have to earn your place here," Daniel told her one evening, the two of them sharing coffee on the back terrace, deliberately as far from the lagoon as the property allowed. "You never did. Not for one single day of the last 8 years." Maria smiled, though there was still sadness behind it, the particular kind of sadness that comes from decades of believing you don't deserve the good thing finally in front of you. "It's hard to unlearn," she admitted. "Believing that love has to be earned through service. I've spent so long being useful to people. I don't quite know how to just be someone's mother. Loud. In the open. Then we'll learn together," Daniel said. "I don't exactly have a manual for this either." They spent that autumn slowly rebuilding something that had technically existed for 34 years but had never been allowed to breathe. Maria told him stories about his birth father, a man she'd loved briefly and lost to circumstances neither of them could control. Daniel told her about the childhood she'd missed, not out of blame, but out of a genuine desire to fill in the gaps, to give her the years she'd been forced to watch from a distance. He also, quietly, funded the completion of the children's hospital wing his mother's foundation had originally intended, using a portion of the recovered funds from the Marchetti settlement, ensuring that whatever else came out of that terrible night, something good would outlast the scandal. Not everyone in Daniel's life adjusted easily to the sudden shift. Board members at his company, accustomed to a certain image of Daniel Cross, polished, unshakable, engaged to old money elegance, struggled with the story now circulating through every business publication in the country. Some worried about brand perception. A few, quietly and carefully, suggested he might want to manage the optics of publicly acknowledging a former household employee as his mother. Daniel fired 2 of them within the month. "I built this company from nothing," he told the remaining board in a meeting that would later be described in at least one profile piece as The moment Daniel Cross redefined what leadership looks like. I did it with values my mother instilled in me. My real mother, who happened to spend 8 years cleaning this house because it was the only way she could be close to the son she'd given up. If any of you think that story is something to be managed rather than something to be proud of, I'd encourage you to reconsider your position here. The remaining board members reconsidered nothing. They applauded. Outside the boardroom, the public response surprised Daniel even more. What he'd feared would be treated as scandal or spectacle instead resonated with people in a way he hadn't anticipated. Stories poured in on social media in his inbox, from strangers who had their own complicated family histories, their own mothers who'd made impossible choices, their own quiet reunions or painful separations. The narrative shifted gradually from billionaire scandal to something gentler, a story about a mother's sacrifice, and a son who chose love over image the moment he learned the truth. Maria, for her part, struggled more with the public attention than Daniel did. "I don't want to be a headline," she told him one night, scrolling nervously through an article that had used the word Cinderella in its title, a word that made her wince every time she saw it. "I didn't do anything heroic. I just stayed close to you the only way I knew how. That's not a fairy tale. That's just a mother who was scared." "Maybe that's exactly why it matters to people," Daniel said gently. "Because it's real. Because most fairy tales aren't built on quiet, everyday sacrifice. Yours is." Slowly, Maria began to soften into her new life, attending a company gala not as staff refilling glasses in the corner, but as a guest, introduced simply and proudly as "my mother" by the man everyone in the room recognized. She cried in the bathroom before that first event, overwhelmed, and cried again afterward, this time from something closer to joy than grief. 6 months after the party that changed everything, Sophia's trial concluded. She accepted a plea agreement rather than risk a jury hearing the full recording of that night. The fear in Maria's voice, the venom in Sophia's, the horrifying moment security had been ordered not to intervene. She received probation, a substantial fine, and a restraining order preventing her from any contact with Maria or Daniel. Her family's business, stripped of both its stolen foundation and much of its remaining reputation, was sold off within the year, the Marchetti name fading quietly from the social pages that had once celebrated it. Daniel didn't attend the sentencing. He'd said everything he needed to say the night it happened, standing dripping and furious in his ruined tuxedo. He spent that day instead at the hospital wing his mother's foundation had finally completed, the one meant for children, the one that had sat unfinished for a decade because someone had decided their comfort mattered more than sick kids they'd never meet. Maria came with him. They walked the halls together, quiet, watching nurses set up equipment in rooms that would soon be filled with small patients who would never know the complicated, painful story behind the walls surrounding them. "Your mother would be proud of this," Maria said softly, running her hand along a freshly painted wall in the children's play area. "Both of them would be. Eleanor for starting it. And you for finishing it." "We finished it," Daniel corrected gently. "Together." It was in that hospital hallway months after the worst night of his life that Daniel finally felt something shift completely inside him. Not just relief that Sophia was gone, not just gratitude that Maria had survived, but a quiet, settled certainty that he had gained something in this whole ordeal that outweighed everything he'd lost. He had lost an engagement built on a lie. He had gained a mother who had loved him unconditionally, silently, for his entire adult life, asking for nothing in return. That night, over dinner at the same estate where everything had nearly ended in tragedy, Daniel raised a glass. Not of champagne this time, but of sparkling water, poured by no one but themselves, at a table set for two. "To second chances," he said. "To choosing truth," Maria added. "Even when it's late. Even when it's terrifying." They clinked glasses in the quiet dining room, the lagoon outside finally drained and being redesigned, at Daniel's insistence, into a simple koi pond, a small, deliberate act of turning something that had nearly cost a life into something peaceful instead. A year passed. Daniel eventually found love again, not with the polish and performance of old money elegance, but with a pediatric nurse named Elena, whom he met, fittingly, during one of his regular visits to the children's hospital wing his mother's foundation had built. Elena had no idea who he was the first time they spoke. She'd simply asked him to stop leaning against a freshly disinfected railing. He liked that about her immediately, that she saw a man before she saw a fortune. Maria, meanwhile, had found her own quiet renaissance. She'd never wanted to simply retire into luxury, despite Daniel's insistence that she never needed to work another day in her life. Instead, she used a portion of the funds Daniel had set aside for her to start something of her own, a small non-profit supporting young single mothers who, like she once had been, faced impossible choices with too little support and even less compassion from the people around them. She called it the Second Chance Foundation, and within its first year, it had already helped dozens of young women access housing, childcare, and the kind of resources that might have changed the entire trajectory of Maria's own life, 34 years earlier. At the foundation's first anniversary event, Daniel stood in the back of the room, watching his mother speak to a crowd of young women who hung on her every word, not because she was polished or performative, but because every sentence she spoke carried the unmistakable weight of someone who had actually lived what she was describing. "I spent 8 years cleaning another family's house," Maria told the room, her voice steady now in a way it hadn't been a year earlier. "Not because I had no other choice, but because it was the only way I knew how to stay close to something I loved without asking for anything back. I want every woman in this room to know, you don't have to earn your place in your child's life through silence and sacrifice. You deserve to stand in the light with them." It just took me 34 years to believe that myself. The room erupted into applause, and Daniel felt his eyes sting with tears he didn't bother hiding. 2 years after the night that nearly ended in tragedy, Daniel stood at the edge of the koi pond that now occupied the space where the shark lagoon once had been, the last physical reminder of that terrible evening, transformed slowly into something gentle instead. Maria stood beside him, along with Elena, now Daniel's wife of 6 months, and a small group of close friends and family gathered for a quiet celebration of the foundation's continued growth. "Do you ever think about that night?" Elena asked Maria gently, watching the koi drift lazily beneath the surface. Maria was quiet for a moment. "Every day," she admitted. "But not the way you'd think. I don't think about the fear anymore, or the water, or how close I came to losing everything. I think about what came after. How the worst moment of my life became the reason I finally got to know my son, out loud in daylight, without hiding anymore." She looked at Daniel, her eyes soft. Sometimes the things that almost destroy us end up being the very thing that finally sets us free. Daniel put his arm around her shoulders, the same way he imagined a son should have been doing for 34 years. Had circumstances been different, had fear and shame and impossible choices not stood in the way for so long. "I used to think success meant building something bigger than yourself," he said quietly, looking out over the water. "Companies, buildings, a name people recognized. I don't think that anymore. I think success is having someone who loved you enough to spend 8 silent years just to be near you, and finally having the courage to let that love be seen." The sun began to set behind the estate, gold light spreading across the water where sharks had once circled and where quiet, ordinary fish now swam without fear. And here's the truth this story leaves us with. Sometimes the people who love us the most are the ones we overlook, standing quietly in the corner of the room, asking for nothing, giving everything. Sometimes the loudest, most polished love is the emptiest. And sometimes the worst night of your life is the very thing that finally shows you who was standing beside you all along. If this story moved you the way it moved me while writing it, please hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel keep telling stories like this one. If you're new here, consider subscribing because we've got so many more emotional, unforgettable stories.